So there's a couple things I want to mention as I'm flying around here. Number one, I held off on the story that you mentioned in Kuwait because I wanted to talk about it with you here. Because you and I both, 1v3, are some government collapse enthusiasts. We love to see the funny haha parliament dissolve and all that. But as it turns out, it might not be so great. Let's go to Middle East Eye. I had a Google search of this pulled up, but I didn't 100% know which article I wanted to look at. Let's just have a brief look at Middle East Eye. Kuwait has suspended its parliament. Is it moving towards autocracy? A mere suspension of National Assembly and articles of constitution could threaten the Gulf region's only semi-democratic political system, analysts say. Huh. The ruler of Kuwait has dissolved parliament for up to 4 years in a move that analysts fear could threaten the country's unique semi-democratic political system. On Friday, the emir announced that the Gulf states' National Assembly would be suspended, as well as several articles of the constitution, in order to review the democratic process and potentially until 2028. Uh-oh. Kuwait has the only elected parliament of the Gulf. Really, there's been a lot of turmoil. Very cool city, by the way. Real American freedom at its best. Yeah, very, very real country. I'm gonna get to that a little bit, but I want to sort of go through and see what's motivating this. The move effectively gives the emir full control over legislation. Okay, that's the motivation. Gotcha. New parliament, headed by the emir's nephew. Ah, yes, classic monarchy move. Was appointed by royal decree on Sunday. Several ministers retain their positions, including the oil, finance, foreign ministers. Okay. They do technically still have a vote of no confidence as a measure that they can do to restore the previous mode of doing things, but it's unlikely that they're going to use it, I think, because they're on decently good terms with the agenda of the emir. Although it does seem there's some sort of petty feud going on between the National Assembly and the Crown Prince, like the legislative and the executive, moving towards the UAE system. Systemic crackdowns and other measures had dampened political activity. Yeah, okay. I think I can kind of surmise from that what I want to say about it. So that's obviously, it's not great. You know, you hate to see the parliament getting disbanded. Although from the perspective of government collapsing, it is kind of funny. It just doesn't seem like, in this case, it seems a little bit less like the chaotic Dutch government collapse where the far right takes power and then can't do anything, and more so just like the royal family is doing these sort of political calculations, not from an ideologically far right perspective, but just from the perspective of consolidating power in their own hands. Such is characteristic of a lot of petrostates. I was gonna mention this in jest, but I think it is actually relevant to the situation that's going on here in Kuwait. Kuwait is not what you would call a real country, right? And I know that sounds mean to say, but it is true. And what I mean when I say that is that, like, in other countries that we would consider democracies, or even like semi-functioning political systems, whether it be Turkey, you know, Turkey is a good example of not a democracy, but a country that is a real country, quote unquote. You know, somebody, even if they wanted to do such a ham-fisted authoritarian move, would have a much harder time doing so and getting away with it in the long run, because Turkey and other countries with a much more stable economy, more diversified economy, more like civil liberties, there's much more of a civil societal structure in countries like Turkey or Germany or Greece or France or the United States or whatever. There's bustling civil life, and there is real, like, there are hallmarks of the material culture of that nation, whatever. Kuwait doesn't really have that. A lot of the states in the Gulf are what we would call petrostates. Basically, most of their population are just slave labor, and then there are some citizens that aren't part of like the inner circle that get paid off to stay quiet and not cause a huge fuss politically, and then there's the ruling class who are richer than God, right? So there's not much of a civil society to be had in those countries. You don't hear of much culture coming out of those countries the way you would with somewhere like Greece, like even a third world country. Russia has more of a civil society than most petrostates, and that's saying something because Russia still doesn't have very much of a civil society. You know, so something like this, I think, was kind of it was kind of foreseeable that this sort of power would eventually be consolidated by the ruling class in the hands of the emir in Kuwait. And of course, you know, I think this is also probably in some way playing to United States interests as well. Kuwait is a U.S. ally, as is Saudi Arabia, and they tend to act pretty similarly. Saudi is much more religiously fundamentalist, but common to both them and Kuwait is the sort of oil production and stuff that the United States is very interested in. So it's likely, I think, that they're just turning to autocracy to basically ramp up the oil production beyond the parameters that like labor rights would typically allow, because the U.S. doesn't care too much about labor rights. They do have a culture, and the favorite one of the USA, oil. Yes, and that's exactly right. That's basically what they have, and that's all the U.S. cares about. You know, Kuwait, very small country. Theoretically, they could have some other kind of leverage via being like a big trading port, but realistically, oil is most of their economy. You know, it's kind of like how, you know, how I've said before that Israel is basically a U.S. military base in the Middle East. It's a similar thing with Kuwait, but instead of military base, it would be more like a trading outpost. You know, and Israel, funnily enough, as a product of Israel being composed mostly of expats and migrants from first world countries, rather than, you know, people who have lived in the area for such a long time. I mean, those would be the Palestinians, and the Israelis typically have lived in Israel only for a couple generations and have much wealthier roots on average. Israel has more of a civil society than Kuwait does. Kuwait is you know, different story. So, nice meme. Kuwait government collapse. They're trying to make more oil because that oil is what makes the U.S. like them. You know. Oh wait, hold on. And apparently there's some analyst here, political analyst, that says Kuwait has had a very long history of electoral politics and popular participation, so making Kuwait politically similar to the UAE will be a difficult task, one that will not be welcomed by many Kuwaitis. Okay, maybe I'm a little bit wrong on that. I would be happy to be proven wrong, even though Kuwait is a small country. We'll see. I still think, even in the face of a comment like that from, you know, a political expert, I would think that it's still a matter of degrees, where Kuwait is more similar to some place like the UAE or Saudi Arabia than it would be to somewhere like Turkey or Greece or any given country like in Eastern Europe. You know, maybe they have more civil society, a more active and participating civil society than the rest of the Middle East, but that still might not be enough to prevent the emir from just sort of becoming an authoritarian dictator, or more authoritarian, I should say. Yeah. But of course, there's also a common theme that I wanted to mention more with other news things that I cover, is that this is just class interests playing out. You know, the reason we think authoritarianism is bad, right? And the reason authoritarianism is bad is because most frequently, with a few very rare exceptions in history, authoritarianism is the retreat of the wealthy elite in rejection of a more liberal status quo, in order to protect their material interests. Authoritarianism is very beneficial to wealthy people and very not beneficial to poor people, because authoritarianism revolves around like concentrating power in such a way that even if you wanted to use it to benefit the masses, it would be very difficult to do so. You need only look at examples like Juan Perón in Argentina, somebody who did a good job of that for a while, but made critical mistakes and eventually just evolved into the same authoritarian system that most other places have. You know? So there is kind of a risk of similar political activity along these lines happening in every country because of the interests of the ruling class. But in Kuwait, it is especially so, as with many other countries in the Middle East, because there are very few levers of civic power and not much of a presence of the lower classes, the working classes. You know, like I mentioned, a lot of the laborers in Kuwait, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia would just be slaves. But that might be all I have to say about that. I don't know. I you know, kind of hard to comment on. I don't think it has any super broad-ranging implications for like the rest of the Middle East or anything. You could read it as another brick in the wall of the rise of the far right globally, that, you know, more countries retreat into authoritarianism. But it's just that, one brick in the wall. If I make that a segment, cut it there.